Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to part 2 of my Kurosawa Before Rashomon season. And today we're going to talk about The Most Beautiful, his second film from 1944, which again can be found on this BFI DVD set of early Kurosawa. This is probably one of the weakest Kurosawa films. It's certainly one of the most controversial as far as it's essentially a World War II propaganda film. People do kind of forget that, Powell and Pressburger made propaganda films too. But again, even though it is a propaganda film, it does become a human story less than, rather than, total propaganda in every frame. And yes, there's comments about destroying American Britain the same way in British propaganda films of World War II. There's stuff about destroying Japan and Germany. There are posters everywhere in the film saying follow the example of the war dead, and culture the mind. It's almost a film about brainwashing, because you have to remember when the Emperor of Japan surrendered at the end of World War II, if he'd asked the nation to commit suicide, large amounts of people would have killed themselves. So the backdrop of all of that, it's set in an optics factory. Takashi Shimura again appears in a small role as the exposition guy, basically, who announces to the factory that they're going to increase their production quota, 100% for the men and 50% for the women. The women's workers, led by Yoko Yaguchi, who would end up marrying Kurosawa a year later, and being married to him until she died in 1985. The female workers are upset because they feel they can do more than just an extra 50%, so they get the quota changed to 70%, or an extra 70%. So they're all very happy about that, and the film essentially is about their struggles to make that quota. It's a strange film in Kurosawa's canon as far as it actually focuses on women rather than men. Kurosawa's a very male-centric director. He's not like Mizoguchi, for example. So it's interesting and refreshing to see a film focused on women. So it basically just follows the stress of getting the quota up, focusing on Watanabe, who is Yoko Yaguchi's character, as she tries to marshal the female workers. There's workers who have accidents and have to go home. There's workers who get ill and have to go home. There's workers who don't want to let their colleagues down, don't want to let their country down, so they hide the fact they've got a fever because they don't want to get sent home. So it's essentially like a working camp in this factory. It's, again, like I said, it's perhaps not, it's not his best film by a long shot, but again, it's interesting. He uses jump cuts sometimes. He uses the metaphor of the volleyball game and also drum practice as a way of seeing the ebbs and the flows, the peaks and valleys of the production. You know, at first they're all happy, and then obviously things happen, and then the production slips, and they become disinterested in volleyball. They're out of tune in their drum practice, and they pull it all together. But again, it's a film about how fanatical people can be with this idea of nationalism and doing what's best for the country and sacrificing yourself, sacrificing your family life. One of the characters has a dying relative and they pretty much just refuse to go home. Even the relatives are like, you don't need to come home, you know, to see me die. The country comes first and the production quota comes first. And again, there's banners everywhere. Follow the example of the war dead. You know, sacrifice your love and your life for the good of the country. There's this message is hammered home all the time. There are moments of humour in the film, but it's mostly almost like a mass brainwashing exercise, just as other countries have done throughout history. You know, when you think of World War One and the slaughter of millions, and these people thought they were helping out the king who didn't give a monkeys about them. Yeah, so it's a disturbing film. You know, the women sing songs about the Mongol invasion of Japan in 1281 and how they were turned away because they couldn't, you know, stand up to the Japanese purity of spirit. So that's The Most Beautiful, which is kind of an ironic title. I'm never actually sure what's the most beautiful. And yes, it's a Kurosawa film that I generally don't revisit. I think this is the second time I've ever watched it, and I can't imagine watching it very often. It's an interesting early film, but again, this is not the Kurosawa that we came to know. But again, technically, it's very good. Again, there's trademark wipes. And he does use jump cuts in a scene to hammer home when somebody gets bad news about an ailing relative. Yes, it's interesting because it is, like I said, a female-centric film, which for Kurosawa is very rare, but not as most interesting, even if you take away the political reasons. But you have to watch these films in a vacuum. So thanks very much for watching part 2 of Kurosawa Before Rashomon. Thanks very much for watching, and hopefully join me for episode 3.